Hello and welcome. I am Zabraxi. Class design is always a touchy topic because there are just so many varying opinions and a lot of people are very, let's say, passionate about the topic. I wanted to talk about the class design in the Burning Crusade, specifically in terms of class utility, because I actually think that the utility in design in TBC is the best Blizzard has ever made. Let's go.
MMO Class Design is a unique beast. In the realm of single-player games, bad design can be mitigated by the truth that your actions have no effect on anyone outside yourself. Now, if you do become aware of the fact that your class is clearly weaker or heck, even more powerful than the other choices, then this acknowledgement can, and almost guaranteed will, change your behavior. This change isn't always beneficial, by the way. In fact, many times players will go out of the way to engage in a manner that actively makes them enjoy the game less. We've seen this in Classic WoW almost perfectly with the world buff meta, and despite the hostility towards the meta itself, all those players complaining still get ready each and every week to go get their buffs. Gabe Zichermann, one of the leading proponents for gamification, once said, quote, "Games are the only force in the known universe that can get people to take actions against their self-interest in a predictable way without using force," end quote. Go ahead and repeat those words out loud the next time that you line up for your world buff train, and you might just realize that players are nothing more than rats in a virtual Skinner box.
The reason I'm setting the stage in this manner is because it's incredibly important to fully express and lay out just how important game design really is. It's something that can make you act in a way that you might not normally. And on one hand, that's really cool, and on another hand, that's terrifying. Imagine if you could interface with the world in a way that would be both beneficial to you and your friends. Well, probably the most common way you would do that is via classes.
There are many elements of class design that are important, but today we're going to focus on utility. Class utility is a fun subject because the value it brings rides a very fine line. People love feeling special. In a party or raid, we all want to feel unique, like we bring something to the group that no one else can. Utility can be a bit of a broad word, but that's intentional for this video. Which of these would you consider utility? A raid-wide buff to increase damage? A target debuff that reduces the damage that mob can deal? A party-wide CC prevention? Or really high DPS? The correct answer is all of them. But why is TBC good here? Well, Burning Crusade is criticized for its encouragement of class stacking. Ironically though, class stacking in TBC is only advantageous after you've checked a lot of boxes. For example, vanilla classes have some uniqueness that makes each one desirable. However, the bulk of those desired traits is narrowed aggressively, mostly due to the debuff limit. We saw this at Classic's launch when one of the largest arguments for why raids were easier than people expected was because of the 16 debuff slots versus the 8 the game originally had. Come TBC, that limit is mostly removed, and from that, we see raid compositions become incredibly varied. The following examples are going to be incredibly oversimplified, I know, but for the sake of the argument, let's take a quick overview of what to bring into each raid across each version of WoW. Vanilla, bring warriors and rogues and mages. Everyone else is to make sure that tier gear isn't wasted. In Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard decided to homogenize the classes, so the most unique thing was that Death Knights were incredibly overpowered, and mages had Living Bomb, while balanced druids had Starfall for AoE. That was exciting. Cataclysm introduced the new Combustion, so bring mages because they just literally kill everything, and bring a DK because of Death Grip, and then some more mages because they still kill everything and they're the only spec with a worthwhile utility, such as Ring of Frost. Miss of Pandaria, it literally doesn't matter at this point because everyone does everything. All DPS can basically do their damage on the move with no penalty, and the only really unique element to the entirety of the class design is that Discipline Priests mostly utilize proactive mitigation rather than raw healing. Priests, coincidentally, are the most broken healers to the point where one Disc Priest in MoP essentially makes up for 2.5 healers. This means that the only unique class mechanic is desirable. Strange. WoD was bring more Demo Warlocks until they were nerfed, and then it was bring more Rogues and Arcane Mages because they just do the most damage. Legion figured out something special. If you make rerolling specs more difficult than sending a rocket into Jupiter's orbit, then there exists a lot of variety. I'll skip BFA and Shadowlands because they pretty much just follow the same trend. For the past decade, optimal raid composition has boiled down to who does the most damage, and not because that's a bad thing, but because there aren't any other metrics to gauge a class's value by. every so often one class will have a unique element to them, such as Resto Shaman right now in Castle Nathria, and now almost all of that class's desirability is due to its utility. While the other healers have essentially nothing special, the reality is that Blizzard will most likely end up nerfing Resto Shaman utility rather than providing the other healers useful tools, or by nerfing Shaman throughput just slightly in order to accommodate for that dirty phrase known as a hybrid tax. I skipped the Burning Crusade, but if I had to sum up its optimal raid makeup quickly, it would be get all the buffs and debuffs in order to make your hunters and warlocks pump. Notice the difference to that statement versus the others. In Wrath, buffs still exist, of course, but there is so much crossover that the class that provides the buff is irrelevant for the most part. It's not about bringing something in order to make mages do even bigger damage. You just bring more fire mages because, well, there's just not really much class synergy other than mages making mages do more damage. While Wrath isn't quite as guilty of this homogenization as Cataclysm Onward, it set the stage in an incredibly damaging way.
Now let's get into the theory of raid composition, which is why I wanted to make this video to begin with. The interesting thing about raid comps in TBC is that many people would immediately point to it as class stacking. You would just stack as many shaman and hunters and warlocks, right? Just get as many of those in the raid as possible. You could, but in actuality, that's not optimal. And that's the magical part.
Warlocks and hunters are the big DPS players come TBC. Stacking them sounds obvious until you realize something. There's a diminishing return on their value, and there comes a point where the raw benefit of that 4th BM hunter would actually be less DPS than if you added a survival hunter first. Exposed weakness is incredibly powerful, and since it scales with the survival hunter's agility, it scales very well and ensures that you'll always keep that serve hunter with you in the raid group. But what about warlocks then? Well, they have better AoE than hunters, so maybe you just stack more of them, right? Well, again, there stems a point where it becomes more valuable to get that Shadow Priest in for Shadow Weaving, especially since that debuff stacks with improved Shadow Bolt. Speaking of Shadow Priest, now you have multiple uses for this class since they can help more than just the Warlocks. Vampiric Touch also assists in the mana regeneration of healers if necessary, or you can be cheeky and have the Shadow Priest benefit 2 different sets of DPS at the same time. You're going to want to bring a mage because of, well, Arcane Intellect, but Arcane Mage is also incredibly potent for burst scenarios, but can be incredibly useful in longer fights with the help of a Shadow Priest's mana regen. Perhaps even throwing the mage in a group with a Resto Shaman for Mana Tide can ensure that they can blast insanely hard for a very long period of time. You want the mage anyway for your warlocks and healers, so why not help them out anyway? You can also bring a Balance Druid for the party-wide crit buff for your warlocks, but Innervate can then be used for the Arcane Mage or the healer. Also, they provide improved Fairy Fire, which allows your DPS to drop hit gear and stack more damage, making your value to raid DPS even higher than just stacking 1 more DPS. And we haven't even touched on Paladin Blessings and their insane power, but Pallies also then bring Seal of Wisdom, which ensures your hunters stay out of Aspect of the Viper longer, and your warlocks don't need to life tap as often, thus more DPS than if you just brought another one of those classes.
This far into the video, and I still haven't talked about things like Warrior Blood Frenzy and the increased attack power that gives. I haven't talked about improved exposed armor for rogues or hemorrhage, and if those things are actually worth playing around, and the counterplay that goes into that. I haven't even talked about Shaman's Bloodlust or Heroism yet, and those are kind of a big deal. This has so much going into it, and all of what I've just talked about in the raid composition earlier, it's like 15 out of 25 raid spots, and there's still more utility I haven't touched.
When it comes to class utility, there is some slight crossover. However, the brilliance behind Blizzard's design is that the crossover usually favored one class if that's all they had, or it forced the group to interact differently depending on which class was present. Tremor Totem and Fear Ward both practically have the same purpose. However, Fear Ward is guaranteed on one person immediately, while Tremor, being party-wide and limited in range, also can take up to a couple seconds to actually pop the fear. That couple seconds your group is waiting to break from fear is something that you're going to plan around. Or if you have the priest, then knowing that your tank is free is also something you're going to plan around, since maybe you can now save a healer CD since the tank can actively use mitigation during that time. We can also see this with the difference between Druid Cyclone and Warlock Banish, functionally providing the same benefit, but one is more broadly applicable to any target but for an extremely small window of time, where Warlock warlocks can mostly set and forget against the right targets. There's still so much more. Elemental Shaman's Totem of Wrath and Enhancement Shaman's Unleashed Fury provide insanely potent party-wide buffs that are also going to change your gearing route in the case of Totem of Wrath. There is even synergy that might not be optimal in theory, such as Fire Mages improve Scorch and Fire Warlocks being able to take advantage of that. Despite Shadowbolt just being incredibly broken, the game has clearly set aside the possible synergistic relationship between two competing pure DPS classes. To briefly return to a phrase I mentioned earlier, I never understood the resistance to the hybrid tax. Classes outputting less damage because of their raid-wide utility seems like an obvious balance act that exists in all RPGs, even down to Dungeons and Dragons. Elemental Shaman don't feel weak when they're lower on the meters because they know the reason those Warlocks are close to being that high is due to the Shaman's presence. Hell, the Warlocks know it too, which is why they beg for you every raid. A lot of people have been asking for a support class in Modern WoW. I remember back during WoD, there was this really large request from the player base to bring a unique support class in an upcoming expansion. The leaks of Shadowhunters and many other fan theories all revolved around this idea that at least one spec of the new class in WoW would be equivalent to the Bard or Machinist or Dancer from Final Fantasy XIV in their supportive role. Instead, we got spell-casting rogues with eye patches. Granted, Demon Hunters do bring Chaos Brand, so I mean, that's something. In much of WoW's life, the raid compositions offer a spattering of all different classes. Like my guild's progression into Mythic Castle Nathria, we brought the strongest classes because it honestly didn't actually matter what utility existed. We did have a variety, like a lot of Hunters and a lot of Unholy DKs, but TBC's desire is a bit different. Raid makeups in TBC are varied because they have to be. It's optimal to bring utility. It's more raid damage to bring a support class. Blizzard realized that tanks, DPS, and healers and all subsets of each role needed to feel unique and to ensure that each class would bring value and flavor to the group. This type of design can only be found really in the Burning Crusade, and it's just one of many reasons that Blizzard created something really special in Outland.
Thank you so much for watching this video. What do you think? Do you think I'm correct here? Do you think I'm blatantly, outlandishly wrong? Do you think that 25 Warlocks is the optimal raid comp? Please let me know down in the comments below. And also, while you're there, there's a little bit of a thumbs up button and a subscribe button if you want to go ahead and hit those. That really helps me out and lets me know what people enjoy and what more to make of. Also, there's plenty of classic TBC and classic WoW content on this channel, and there's going to be more coming, way more. Also, please feel free to follow me on Twitch and Twitter, where I live stream and talk about things like Classic Burning Crusade and gaming as a whole. There's a lot there. If you would oblige little old me and hit those buttons and check me out, I'd appreciate it. Thank you again for watching. I really appreciate you stopping by, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!